tanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil is moving through a corridor of water just 17 miles wide. On one shore, American warships. On the other, Iranian missile batteries pointed directly at the shipping lane. The captain doesn't sleep. He hasn't slept in 3 days. Strait of Hormuz is the single bottleneck through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes every single day. And right now, it is closer to being shut down than at any point in the last 20 years. You already felt what happened the last time oil spiked. You felt it at the gas pump. You felt it in your grocery bill. You felt it when your electricity statement arrived and you read the number twice because you thought it was a mistake. Now ask yourself this. What happens when the route doesn't just get threatened, but actually closes? Because here's what the analysts are quietly saying behind closed doors, and what the headlines aren't telling you clearly enough. This time, prices may not come back down. Ever. By the end of this, you'll understand why one 17-mile stretch of water, in a decision made in Washington in 2018, set off a chain reaction that is now almost impossible to reverse. To understand where we are, you have to go back to 1979. Not because history class demands it, but because everything happening at the pump today has a direct line back to that single year. The Iranian Revolution didn't just change one government, it rewired the entire logic of the Middle East. Iran, a country sitting on some of the largest oil reserves on Earth, flipped from American ally to American adversary almost overnight. The hostility wasn't just political. It was embedded into the new state's identity, anti-American, anti-Israel, and deeply committed to proving that the West could not control the region's energy. For decades, the tension was managed, uncomfortable but contained. Then in 2015, something shifted. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, was signed. It was imperfect, it was fragile, but it was a valve. It released pressure that had been building for 30 years. 3 years later, the United States withdrew from the deal. Iran resumed nuclear enrichment. That decision, made in 2018, is the foreshadowing that almost nobody connected to today's gas prices. Because what it did wasn't just restart a nuclear program, it removed the last formal mechanism for de-escalation. It told Iran, in effect, the rules no longer apply. Everything you just learned about that 2018 withdrawal, the political noise, the headlines, the arguments, is about to matter in a way that has nothing to do with politics. It's about to matter in your wallet. Here's what the energy market actually runs on. Not oil. Risk. Oil is the commodity. Risk is the price setter. And when traders in London and Houston and Singapore look at the Strait of Hormuz today, they are not seeing a shipping lane. They are seeing a loaded weapon with multiple fingers on the trigger. Iran controls the most strategically dangerous coastline on the strait. It has anti-ship missiles that can reach any tanker in the channel. It has fast attack boats designed for swarm tactics. And it has a nuclear program that Western intelligence now assesses is weeks, not years, away from weapons-grade capability. Israel views that capability as an existential threat. It has said so publicly and repeatedly. And unlike most countries that say things and do nothing, Israel has a documented history of acting preemptively, precisely, and without warning. The United States Fifth Fleet exists in the Gulf specifically to prevent a closure of Hormuz. But here's the complication no one in Washington wants to say clearly. The Fifth Fleet can defend the strait, but it cannot stop the risk premium. S&P Global Commodity Insights and Wood Mackenzie, firms that don't traffic in drama, have both modeled the scenarios. A partial disruption of Hormuz traffic sends prices into territory not seen since the 2008 crisis. A full closure produces numbers that economists describe with unusual candor as unprecedented. And it gets more complicated. Iran hasn't been acting alone. Over the past decade, it has built a semi-unified proxy military network. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias across Iraq and Syria, each a separate pressure point, each capable of triggering escalation independently. The Houthis already demonstrated this in the Red Sea, disrupting commercial shipping, forcing major carriers to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks and millions of dollars in costs to global supply chains. That rerouting didn't make the news the way a missile strike would, but it hit your grocery bill the same way. Then in 2019, something happened that most people have already forgotten. Drones and cruise missiles struck the Abqaiq processing facility in Saudi Arabia, the single most important oil processing site on Earth. For a brief period, 5% of the global oil supply vanished. Prices spiked within hours. The attack was contained, prices came back down, but here's what the market quietly did after that. It never fully let go. A portion of that fear got built into the baseline price. Permanently. I need you to hold that word. Permanently. Because what comes next reframes everything you've just heard. There's a structural mechanism at work that most financial coverage never mentions. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. For years, the assumption was this: oil prices spike during crises, and then they normalize. That's how it has always worked. That assumption was always based on one hidden condition, that the underlying system was stable enough to recover. That condition no longer holds. In the old model, a spike was an event. It had a beginning and an end. In the new model, the one we are now living inside, the risk is no longer an event. It is a condition. The instability in the Gulf, the proxy network, the nuclear timeline, the breakdown of diplomatic frameworks, these are not temporary. They are the new baseline, and markets price baselines differently than they price events. An event premium disappears when the event ends. A baseline premium doesn't disappear because the baseline doesn't change. That 2018 withdrawal from the nuclear deal wasn't just a policy decision. It was functionally the moment the market's assumption of recoverability broke. Because without a diplomatic framework, there is no defined path back to stability. And without a path back to stability, the risk never fully prices out. Several major energy firms have now begun modeling a permanently elevated floor for oil prices, a baseline above which prices may fluctuate, but below which they are unlikely to fall for any sustained period. The question, one analyst told colleagues in a closed briefing, is no longer whether prices will come down. The question is whether consumers and governments will eventually accept the new floor as the new normal. There is a second layer that almost never gets discussed. Some of the actors in this system benefit from elevated oil prices: Gulf states with sovereign wealth funds, energy companies with record margins, geopolitical players whose leverage increases when energy costs rise globally. This does not mean elevated prices are a coordinated conspiracy. It means the incentive structure for resolving the instability is weaker than most people assume. That silence you're sitting with right now, that's the part the market already priced in. But there's one more layer. One scenario most analysts treat as unlikely, but none of them are willing to call impossible. There are two futures being modeled right now. In the first, escalation remains controlled. Hormuz stays open, but perpetually threatened. Oil prices stay elevated, not catastrophically, but durably. Inflation remains a persistent background condition. The new floor becomes the new normal. In the second scenario, something tips. A miscalculation, a strike that goes further than intended. A nuclear threshold crossed or perceived to be crossed. Hormuz closes. Asia loses access to the majority of its imported oil simultaneously. Europe, already weakened after reducing dependence on Russian energy, faces a second shock from the opposite direction. That scenario is not a prediction, but it is no longer a remote theoretical. The distance between Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 is measured in decisions being made right now in Tehran, in Jerusalem, in Washington, by people operating under pressure, with incomplete information, and with interests that do not always align with stability. What you pay at the pump is the market's best guess, updated in real time about which scenario is more likely on any given day. That tanker captain moving through a 17-mile strait in the dark, he's not just carrying oil, he's carrying the answer. If this changed how you think about energy prices, drop a comment with one word describing what you feel right now. Resigned, angry, surprised, just one word. And if you've been assuming prices would eventually normalize, has this changed your mind? Tell me why or why not. If you want to understand the systems shaping your daily costs before the headlines catch up, subscribe. And next, the country that quietly controls more of the global food supply than anyone talks about, and it's not the country you're thinking of.